Welcome to the Flightcast, a place where opinions aren't right or wrong, and where we can agree or disagree about movies, TV, and other assorted media because it's all subjective. My name is Ray. Thank you so much for joining me. And before I dive into everything for today's episode, there's a story I want to tell. Thing happened earlier today. I've been on Threads actively, like, a lot more in, like, the last month or so. It's been a minute since I've come back to that. To one of the other social media hellscapes, right? I was on BLUESKY exclusively, and it really was just, like, after the election, and it really was just all politics all the time, not a whole lot of, like, TV or movie engagement. But it's all still there on Threads, right? And it's been pretty active, to be honest with you, as far as, like, discussions. And so I've been responding to, and any of you who follow me on Threads, I've been responding to a number of different, posts here and there. And we had another one that popped up today. This is from an account named Oceanic 253 Planet. Now, this is an account, 251 followers, and all it does is post images. So it's one of those, like, okay, this is like total clickbait. This is a regurgitator. This is, a nothing account. This is not a person, or maybe a person runs this. This could very easily be bot run, right? Just for the sake of spreading content, if you will. 251 followers, whatever. So what happened was another account that I follow, another mutual that I have, who runs a podcaster called Panel by Panel, was responding to one of the posts that Oceanic 253 Planet posted today. And it said, name a movie that makes you say this. And it's an image from, I don't know which Venom movie this is from, to be honest with you. It's from one of the three. But the caption for the image is, F this movie. Right? Name a movie that makes you say this. F this movie. And Panel by Panel answered Batman and Robin. And used an Arnold gif. Let's kick some ice. Okay. All right. Whatever. Other answers that were suggested: Jurassic World: Fallen Kingdom, Mission Impossible 2. Of course, you had some dipshit that posted Man of Steel, and just for good measure, I'll tell you that they're sporting a logo that is nerfed off of Marvel Studios and call themselves Comic Central on TikTok. Oh, good for you. I'm sure you know all the shit. And Kraven the Hunter, it is also somebody that listed all of the Sony films. Also F the studio that makes these movies. I mean, just your standard clickbait bullshit from accounts with 19 followers and 28 followers, 24 followers, whatever, right? So what do I normally do when I find an account like this that just posts something for the sake of negativity? I will usually answer no. And that's what I did. I absolutely quoted it with, I used the Michael Jordan gif of all things, because I didn't want to use the Uncle Buck gif, because I usually use the Uncle Buck no gif, because that is like, my standard no, if you will. I like the delay, right? I like how it looks. But I didn't want them to think that I was choosing that movie, especially since I just recently watched that film and added it to my library. I do really enjoy that film. So no, didn't want to use that. So I had to use a GIF that wasn't a movie. And so I used the Michael Jordan GIF and said, no, obviously, I'm not going to answer that, because that's just negative chatter about a movie I don't like. And you know how I feel about negative chatter about movies that we don't like. Why are we focusing on shit that we don't like? The social media focuses way too much on that. So I always answer no to stuff like this. And the interesting thing this time is I answered no, and Amr chimed in. One of our mainstays now over at Friday Flight, as far as some fantastic feedback. He posted, not even Justice League? Or maybe not, because the actual and real Justice League movie exists and can be watched at any time. And initially I sent him a response, and this time I went with Chicago Fire. I went with Bowden from Chicago Fire, and I said, that is correct. Right? Because that is how I process the Justice League film. I don't even acknowledge it in that regard, because I haven't had to for the last 4 years. Since Zack Snyder's Justice League came out, that is my replacement for it, because that's the real film, like he said. So I don't even think of Justice League in that sense. I don't critique it. I don't have critical thoughts or feelings necessarily about it. But I got to thinking after he posted that, and I said, I don't engage in negative conversation, and I'm not interested in answering the question, name a movie that makes you say F this movie. I'm not. But if I did decide to become one of those accounts that just constantly talks about what they hate and despise and loathe with respect to movies, TV, and other sort of media, which thankfully I don't do that, but let's say that I did. If there was a movie, like any film, out of all of the countless films that I've watched in my days, right? And I can go down the list of some films that I really do not care for, right? I can talk about, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. I can talk about Thor Love and Thunder. I can talk about a number of films that we reviewed over at Squadcast Media for the movie Squadcast Patreon, if you will. I can talk about how absolutely horrific Son of the Mask is. I can talk about Howard the Duck and how I wish I could scrub my brain clean of that movie forever. I could talk about those movies. I absolutely could. But I don't think there is a single movie, if I really think about it, if I really want to answer this question, I can't think of a single movie on this earth that makes me say F this movie more than Justice League, right? Because think about why I would be saying that about this particular film. First of all, it would have nothing to do, it would have very little to do, I would say, with respect to the actual subjective appraisal of the content within the film. The film, as I've said many times, is meh. It is a paint by numbers film. It's boring. It does nothing. It's very lazily constructed and is not meaningful in any shape or form in that regard, right? And mind you, you're talking to somebody, and I've mentioned this many times and I will continue to reiterate it, and this is one of the ways that I kill the gotcha people, right? Because there's a lot of people on the internet that love to do gotcha, right? They dig through all your old recordings, or maybe they find your old shows somewhere else, and somebody out there, if they knew that if they really cared that much that I hated Justice League as much as I do, that I absolutely don't care for that movie, that I would say F that movie, they might go and find the episode of Fans Without Borders that I recorded with Brent, where I sung the praises of the movie and talked about how I saw it 3 times. They'd be like, "This you? Didn't you like it?" And then I would absolutely refer that person to, "Yes, that is me. Would you like to hear all the episodes where I changed my mind over the next 6 months?" And when I officially joined #Release the Snyder Cut in July of 2018. Would you like to hear those? Because we are allowed to change our minds as human beings, whether you accept that or not. And that's absolutely what I did. But the thing is, my reasoning for actually saying F this movie with respect to Justice League, it has not nearly as much to do with the content of the film itself and everything to do with all of the noise surrounding it all. And we all know, we don't need to rehash. Okay, I'm already dredging up some old wounds and some bitter memories for those of us DCEU fans and Snyderverse fans. I get it. And there's a segue into this because it's one of the things I want to talk about later on with respect to, the impending release of Superman and some stuff going on social media that I am just kind of done with. But at any rate, the whole, everything surrounding it, that not just how Zack Snyder was treated, not just about how he was dicked around with respect to BVS getting cut short, with what they did to David Ayer after that, but also, the whole situation of, they finished the 111 days of principal photography, and got all that done by November of 2016. They were in post-production. They had an assembly cut. The tragedy happens in the Snyder family. Zack decides to step down, and Warner Brothers, in their infinite flippin' wisdom, decides that they're going to bring Joss Whedon in behind his back, reshoot about 70% of the movie, or however much it is, balloon the budget past $300 million because they wanted to try and make the next Avengers. And they cut it down to 2 hours, and they had all the surface level lazy shit that you would expect boardroom suits and producers that don't know their ass from a hole in the ground to do to a movie. And they did. And the result is what we got, theatrically released on November 17th, 2017. And it's unfortunate that that's how it went that way. And it's really painful, like as a fan, to think that, some shit like that would go down. And we had to wait 4 years before we saw the actual version of the film in that regard, right? And all the stuff surrounding it, all the toxicity, right? What we heard about how toxic the set was, how Ray Fisher was made to feel, how Gal Gadot was made to feel, how Ben Affleck was made to feel, how everybody was just in a really, really bad spot, emotionally, physically, professionally, like just a mess. An absolute toxic mess that so many of us are aware of. And those are my reasonings for why I would say F that movie, right? It really doesn't have much to do with the movie itself. I mean, the movie itself is crap. Like, it's not a great movie, but it's hardly the worst comic book movie I've ever seen. It's not like I would look at Justice League and go, "Oh, this is so much worse than Howard the Duck," or "This is so much worse than, Guardians Volume 2 or Thor Love and Thunder." No, it's not even that. It's just meh. Like, if Justice League was an MCU movie, it would probably be low tier. It'd probably be in the low tier of my MCU list. But my reasons for saying F this movie, if I were to say that, go way beyond the actual, like, subjective quality of the film. It has way more to do with everything that happened behind the scenes and how it really symbolized the dysfunction and the absolute idiocy of Warner Brothers back at that time, and DC Films even more so at that time, and how when it was just the rinky-dink division under Warner Brothers Picture Group that was just being run by inmates at this point. When Jeff Johns and John Berg ran that into the ground, they didn't know what the hell they were doing, and they thought that they were revolutionizing things, and they were not. They were just being lazy. They were doing a paint-by-numbers situation. They didn't trust their brain trust, right? They didn't trust Zack Snyder from the beginning, to execute his plan. They didn't trust the general audience, building and the $3 billion that they had spent on the first 4 films in the DCU. They didn't trust all of that. So that film symbolizes literally the destruction of a franchise, the destruction of the DCEU. It started there. I mean, it started in earnest earlier with, how BVS was treated and what happened to Suicide Squad, but it definitely reached the peak and the culmination, the climax, if you will, with Justice League. And so, yeah, it's an interesting answer to the question, and I just found myself thinking about it because I answered no, obviously. I hadn't even thought of Justice League, to be honest with you, and then Amr brought it up, and I was like, you know, I'm still not going to discuss this movie. I still don't want to continue to, focus on things that I don't like. So I'm still not going to fall into that trap. I'm still not going to answer that. But if I did answer it, if I was somebody that wanted to focus on the negativity more than, just as much as so many others do on social media, that would be my answer. And there's part of me that wants to just go ahead and say that, right? There's part of me that wishes to go ahead and submit that particular answer. I bet I'd get some bites. I bet I would get some attention. I bet I would get some likes. I bet Phil and Anthony and a number of you listen to the show. I bet you would agree with me. I bet you would say, yeah, go ahead. And maybe one of these days I will engage in one of those posts. I don't necessarily want to be one of those people that's just always going to stand on the soapbox and be like, I refuse to be this way and that way. No, sometimes you can indulge, right? Sometimes you can be a fan and say, you know what, F this movie, right? And again, this would be a unique scenario because it's not like I'm picking Thor Love and Thunder. It's not like I'm picking, Guardians Volume 2, right? I'm not saying, oh, I hate this movie because I don't like the lighting, or I don't like the director, or I don't like the writing, or I think they have no idea what they're doing with this character. No, it's nothing like that. It has everything to do with all the toxicity and all the absolute horse shit that was centered around the existence of Justice League. Justice League is a movie that we should not even, shouldn't have even seen the light of day. That movie should not exist. It legitimately should not exist. What we should have seen, the only versions of Justice League that should exist are the original theatrical version that Zack Snyder would have cut together, Zack Snyder and his team would have put together, and then the extended edition, which, obviously there'd be a bunch of stuff that wouldn't be included. The Joker stuff wouldn't be there. The Nightmare stuff wouldn't be there, right? There's a lot of stuff that we have in Zack Snyder's Justice League that would not have been in an extended version of the movie had it been released properly in 2017. I get that, okay. But still, those are the only versions of Justice League that should exist in that regard. And so that would be my reason for why I would say F this movie for Justice League if I were to answer that question. And there's part of me that is, I've got the post up now on Flightcast, and I'm tempted. I'm tempted to just go ahead and say, you know what? I'll go ahead and answer that question. And I'm talking about it here now on this show, but I would also respond to Amr's post and be like, you know what, Amr, you're right. I think I am going to answer that. And then I would submit that answer because that movie is just, so many issues. And I know there are people out there in our circles that actually think it's better than Zack Snyder's Justice League. I know that subjectively speaking, there are people out there that don't like Zack Snyder's work and just have this irrational hatred toward it, and it makes their eyes twitch, and it's in their dreams and in their nightmares, and they can't let it go, and they're just like, Joss Whedon, as horrible of a person as he is, saved us from more Snyder madness, and he finally torpedoed the DCEU. I know there are anti-Snyder cultists that feel that way. I know there are. I absolutely know they're out there, and they feel that way. And you know what? It's all subjective. They can feel whatever toxic way they wish, right? But it's just, man, I tell you what, that movie can go straight to hell. It really can. And that's the one movie I can think of. Like any other movies, right? Like, again, pick any, keep mentioning the 2 movies that are like on the bottom of my list. Literally movies 35 and 36 on my MCU rankings list. Guardians Volume 2 and Thor Love and Thunder. I keep bringing those up. Those, I won't say, no, I'm not saying, they don't make me say F this movie, right? As much as I don't necessarily care for either of them, I don't feel that strongly about them. And even all those other movies that I mentioned earlier that we watched on Squadcast Movies that are just absolutely abysmal and beyond. It's like, no, I watched them once for that show. I shall never watch them again. Like, ever. Ever in life. You couldn't pay me to watch Son of the Mask. You couldn't pay me to watch Howard the Duck. And I know there are people out there that enjoy both of those movies, and I don't mean to be negative. I'm just making a point that Justice League transcends all of that for me as far as an F that movie answer. Oi. And there's a point, there's a reason for why I'm kind of starting with that story, because it leans into a topic that I want to really talk about in this particular episode, because there's not a ton of news, right? You know, it's not like a whole lot of big stuff. I feel like there's a trailer that came out recently that I'm missing. You know, there Jared did bring up on Friday Flight that the Spider Noir clip, but you know that's not till next year. There is a new trailer. I don't know if people have seen for Nobody 2. There is a sequel, the sequel to Nobody, and it looks awesome. It looks like I want to see that day one, because I loved the first one, and I own that movie. The Old Man John Wick starring Bob Odenkirk. Hell yes. And of course, it's Mission Impossible Final Reckoning week, and they're already like promoting and teasing that. Like they had the premieres recently, and Tom Cruise and everybody talking about how it's the last mission and it ties all the previous movies in together. So yeah, definitely got to see that. So that's coming out this week. But aside from that, you know, not really a ton of news. So before diving into the big thing that I wanted to talk about tonight, which does connect to the story that I just told, I want to remind everybody that you can find this show and my other shows at theflightcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts, whether it's Apple Podcasts, whether it's the Flightcast YouTube page, whether it's Spotify or Pandora. You can find the Flightcast at all of those places or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can hear this show on Mondays. You can hear Flightbox on Wednesdays. We're going to go back to a Wednesday schedule. I'm also going to cover Ironheart, but that's going to be a bit tricky because apparently they're doing the 3-episode release schedule again, just like they did with Andor. They're only doing it for 2 weeks, but yeah, we're going to have to try and navigate that. But I'm definitely talking about that show. We're definitely talking about Ironheart on Flightbox, so stay tuned for that. And there's some other television catch-up that I may do some Flightbox episodes on as well in the coming weeks, if you will. So stay tuned for that as well. And then, of course, we have Friday Flight, the listener feedback show, every Friday. This past one was on a Saturday because my work in real life delayed recording for a little bit because of some inclement weather that we were dealing with here in the Midwest, but it is what it is. That episode came out. It was a long one. We had a lot to talk about because a lot happened last week. But again, you can find all those shows at theflightcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And I also want to take a moment to thank all of the supporters, very loyal supporters of patreon.com/theflightcast. I know I've been teasing some bonus content, some more bonus content coming, and it's got to hit soon because not only do I want to dive into some more movies that I haven't watched that you probably already have watched for extra episodes of Flight Review, but I've also got to get my DC Universe Infinite situation figured out so that I can read the Superman comics that I need to read that James Gunn and others recommended in preparation for Superman, which is now less than 2 months away. So I've got to figure those out, and I've got to get those recorded and talk about those. So stay tuned for those episodes of bonus flight report, if you will. I haven't done an episode of that in I don't know how long. So stay tuned for that and other bonus content coming down the pipe at patreon.com/theflightcast. All right, so here's what we're talking about tonight. We need to make something abundantly clear as we get closer and closer to the release of Superman on July 11th. And mind you, there's a good amount to talk about with respect to how that is starting to ramp up here. But the first thing that I want to touch on, first and foremost, is the sentiment that I knew I was going to see on social media and is definitely starting to ratchet itself up here and there. And that is the escalation of anti-Snyder rhetoric with respect to this movie. Now look, I have seen more than a few people on threads that have expressed disgust with both sides of this ridiculous debate, right? I've seen more than a few people, and I've reposted their posts. Here, let me find one that I recently reposted that I really appreciated. There's a few, actually, but here's one. They actually, I think did they screenshot somebody? I don't know if it was on Twitter or if it was on Threads or whatever, but this individual at the Real TCU said, "Hot take, I loved Man of Steel and Zack Snyder's Justice League, liked BVS, and I'm unbelievably excited for James Gunn's Superman. Like, I'm gooning for that movie," he says. "You don't have to pick a side and compare the two. Y'all are annoying on the timeline," crying emoji and praying hands. And that was screenshot and reposted by Florian, _Mysterioic_Beer Baron. He said, "Finally, somebody said it." Applause emojis. "You can like the Snyderverse and be excited for the new DC movies. You can dislike some of James Gunn's movies and still be excited for Superman." Yes, so this sentiment does exist. right? These people, these rational bastions of humanity do exist, or at least we believe that they are humanity. Maybe they're bots. I don't know, whatever. They seem to have a few more followers. But yeah, these people are out there, and, newsflash, they probably represent the majority of the general audience as well. I mean, we've talked about this before. The general audience, by and large, is not drawing lines in the sand here. They just see, hey, new Superman movie, and they will decide whether or not they want to go check it out, right? And listen, to that end, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge something that we talked a little bit about on Friday Flight. I think Alex was the one that brought this up. He was talking about a commercial that they had done in which it was a specialized ad for the NBA playoffs where Jason Tatum of the Boston Celtics was being anointed the new Superman in Superman's place, but it was a complete tie-in ad for the NBA tying into the release of Superman. And that's how, like we've seen plenty of tie-in ads before. That's how it ended. Superman in theaters May 11th, right? So we've got that. Right, so that commercial, which unfortunately it got pulled because Jason Tatum, tore his Achilles and was out for the rest of the playoffs. We won't see him again until next season. So yeah, naturally they're not going to run that ad anymore. But part of me hopes that there are other NBA players that can take that over. Whether they play for I think it's the Thunder and the Timberwolves and the Knicks, and I forget who else is left in the NBA playoffs right now. It's down to the Final Four. They're down to the conference finals. Hopefully, another round of that marketing, another commercial with another NBA player currently in the playoffs can happen. But even if it doesn't, it's still cool that Jason Tatum ad did happen. But one other thing that I want to highlight here is James Gunn was posting earlier today, and this has been, I guess some people have complained about this. I haven't seen anybody on my timeline complain about this, thankfully, because, I mean, just this is a stupid thing to complain about. But he was posting earlier that he was really excited over crypto being on a Milkbone box. And it's him with a picture of it pointing to it, and he says, I don't know why I get such a kick out of this, but I love it. Crypto on a Milkbone box. And listen, when I see this marketing, right, when I see this Milkbone box with crypto on it, I just go, bravo, James Gunn. There is one thing that I wanted DC Studios in its relative infancy as a brand new autonomous unit underneath Warner Brothers, Warner Brothers Discovery in that regard, right? Like, the one thing I wanted to see them do other than get a handle on the PR was also get a handle on the marketing, stronger marketing, more involved marketing, product placement marketing. And here we go. Here we have it. We got NBA ads with players, pointing to the movie, and now we've got Milkbone. I'm looking at this particular box, Superman only in theaters, crypto right there on the front of a Milkbone box. There you go. That's what I'm talking about. This is the type of marketing that was lacking sorely during the DCEU era. DC Films didn't know what the hell they were doing. This is what you do. This is how you do it. This is what Marvel's been doing for 17 years. Seriously. And look, Disney, best brand builders on planet Earth, apparently, except when it comes to Ironheart, because they're not really that big on black women. Oh, wait, did I say that out loud? Whatever, I digress. My point is this is the type of marketing that we've seen in the MCU, right? When we see Captain Marvel, Brie Larson driving Lexus cars or whatever car commercial she's been in, or when we see the cross promotion with ESPN and ABC Good Morning America and stuff like that, and other products where it's like, go see this Marvel movie in theaters. This is precisely what DC Studios needs to be doing. And if anybody has a complaint about it, you're out to lunch. I'm sorry. This is precisely what should be happening, this type of product placement. And look, think about this for a second, right? We don't know how much of the general audience is going to be interested in seeing the Superman movie, but you got to shoot your shot. You got to, absolutely commit as much as you can to marketing. And it does kind of help, I think, maybe a little bit to look at the current superhero landscape, the movies so far this year. Not a huge turnout necessarily for Captain America Brave New World. Thunderbolts had a strong opening weekend, a solid opening weekend, but we don't know what the legs are going to be for that necessarily, right? There's a chance that with Superman being the only real game for DC, the only game for DC this year in theaters, there's a chance that they could really sap up some of the general audience's attention, right? Because Superman is bigger, historically speaking, than Captain America, even in the MCU era. Bigger than Thunderbolts, as great as that movie was. And honestly, I would also say bigger than the Fantastic Four. And I realize that that's going to be its prime competition, but that's the great part about it being 2 weeks after Superman. So it's going to have 2 full weekends to itself to really endear itself to the general audience, hopefully, right? So this could be a stroke of genius, and then just ratcheting up that general marketing, ratcheting up that marketing for the general audience, that product placement, right? So imagine you got a dog at home, and maybe you knew that crypto existed, or maybe you didn't know that crypto existed, and you go to get some treats for your dog, and all of a sudden you see this dog with a cape and Superman logo on the box. It's like, wait, what? Wait a minute. What is this? New Superman movie, right? So somebody, a dog owner out there, had no idea there was a new Superman movie, doesn't watch a whole lot of TV, does not follow it the way that we do, sees that Milk-Bone box and goes, hey, you hear about a new Superman movie? When does it come out? July 11th? Hey, I might go see that, right? Now they might go home, look for trailers, ask questions, do whatever, and they may actually start to plan the possibility of taking taking their family, whoever it is, wife, kids, to go see Superman. Hell, you know what? It wouldn't surprise me if at some point, and this is different than Chicken Jockey, that ridiculous nonsense. But I tell you what, if Warner Brothers is willing to allow that to happen with respect to like special Minecraft screenings, then I could envision a scenario where a theater chain somewhere allows you to bring your dog, which mistake, right? Like, unless because what, you're gonna have a quiet dog? No, you're gonna have a dog yipping and barking every time crypto shows up on screen. But I can imagine like some type of special bring your pets or bring your dog screening of Superman. Like it, I'm not saying it's gonna happen. I could just say I'm envisioning that's a possibility, right? These are the types of marketing pushes that can succeed. These are the things that I am glad to see DC Studios doing. I don't know if it's going to work. I have no idea if this or the NBA advertising is going to work. I don't know, but I'm glad they're trying. I'm glad that the effort is there. This is the type of marketing that I've wanted to see DC do for a long time. DC Films did not do this by and large. They did it here and there, but DC Studios knows that it needs to get off to a good start, needs to make a big splash with Superman. So doing this type of product placement and doing this type of cross promotion is important and in my opinion, vital for the hopeful success of this film. So yeah, that bravo to James Gunn, bravo to Peter Safran, bravo to everybody at DC Studios for doing this. This is what they need to be doing. And if anybody has an issue with crypto being on a Milk-Bone box, why? What's the problem? What is the harm? Is this more of your complaints about, how lighthearted the film is going to be and how it's not going to be what you think the Superman character is? Well, here's the deal. And allow me to get back into the crux of what I was talking about earlier with respect to this whole situation with Superman fandom as a whole. There is a false, misleading, and unhealthy perception out there on social media that all Zack Snyder fans are cultists who are torpedoing James Gunn's Superman movie and are trashing it and are expecting it to fail and are rooting for it to fail actively. Like, that's the belief, right? People see me talk about Man of Steel and BVS. People see me defend the DCEU, and they mistakenly believe, whether they're in bot form or human form, that I somehow detest the fact that a James Gunn Superman movie exists and that I have no desire to see it, and that I think I'm hoping that people boycott it and hopefully it will be trash and the DCU will be dead on arrival so that they can sell DC to Netflix and restore the Snyderverse. That lunatic bullshit, right? There is a perception out there, at least based on what I've seen the last couple of days, and it's starting to ramp up as we expected. We expected that this would ramp up the closer we got to the release of Superman. Why? Because we knew that a lot of people on the other side of this, the people that are taking sides in that regard, we knew that they were going to use this movie as a weapon against Man of Steel, a weapon against BVS, a weapon against Zack Snyder's Justice League, and basically anything that Zack Snyder touched that has Superman's name on it in that regard, right? We knew this was going to happen. We knew they were going to do it, and they most certainly have started, right? They started well before, when James Gunn was appointed, head of DC Studios, and when we found out he was going to write and direct Superman, right? The people started then, and now it's only getting thicker, if you will, right? More of this shit is coming out because more of these posts are showing up, and I'm seeing them, Phil is seeing them, a number of you, Anthony, number of you people, number of you guys are seeing them in that regard, right? Like, we're seeing the bullshit narrative with respect to how apparently we all are just sitting here, grinding our teeth and screaming, like, I can't believe anybody would watch that piece of No. Here's the deal, okay? Made this abundantly clear, and this is for anybody else, because I've gotten some new followers lately. Anybody that listens to this show, right? Those of you that are regulars, you already know what I'm about to say. Those of you that are brand new to this show, listen to me very clearly here. There are two cults at play here, and then there is one group of rational people. Okay, there is the Snyder cult, which those are the people who are not Zack Snyder fans, right? And that's an important distinction here that I really want to get across tonight, is that Snyder cultists are not Zack Snyder fans. And I've said this a couple of times in the last few days on threads. You know how I know they're not Zack Snyder fans in an objective sense? Because they don't watch Rebel Moon. They don't promote Army of the Dead. They don't talk about Twilight of the Gods. They don't care about anything that man does outside of DC properties. They only care about his incarnations of Superman, Batman, and the Justice League as a whole. That's all they care about. That's all they want. They have focused all of their energies on the DCEU and the Snyderverse. That's all they want. They could not care less about the man's livelihood, about his sanctity, about his family, about his... They act like they do, but they don't. They just want him to, push all that aside and go back to making the DC movies that they wanted to see in the first place, right? Because they were bullied. They most certainly were bullied by the other cult, the Anti-Snyder cult, right? The Snyder cult was bullied by the Anti-Snyder cult 9 years ago into, this idea that if you like Man of Steel or BVS, then you don't fundamentally understand Superman and Batman, and you're just contributing to the degradation of those characters, right? They were bullied. They were absolutely bullied by comic creators, by, bloggers, critics, fanboys, everybody, right? They were bullied by that, and they turned themselves toxic in the process. You either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. And make no mistake, the Snyder cult, they're villains. They most certainly are villains now. And they're a villain created by another villain. And that other villain, as I mentioned a minute ago, is the Anti-Snyder cult. And those are the ones that have had it out for Zack Snyder from the beginning. And those are the ones that continue to push out the bullshit disinformation about how he hates his mother and how he, has sexual assault fantasies about Batman in prison and all that shit, all the stuff taken out of context. He's an Ayn Rand fan, so clearly we know who he voted for in the election. All this bullshit, right? Despite the fact that everyone that has worked with Zack Snyder has sung his praises. He has absolutely been an ally and an advocate of minorities and women, right? We never mind all the actual evidence, right? All the shit that talk to Ray Fisher, talk to Gal Gadot, talk to Ben Affleck, talk to Jason Momoa, talk to anyone, principal cast and crew. Hell, talk to Joe Morton. Anybody out there a fan of Scandal? Anybody out there a fan of Joe Morton, right? Papa Pope, Eli Pope, right? He was Silas Stone in Justice League and in Zack Snyder's Justice League. And you know what? For a fun experiment, just, for the sake of it, I won't watch it again, but for a fun experiment, go and count the minutes that his character, his vital, important character, the father of Victor Stone, Cyborg, count how many minutes he's in Justice League, and then count how many minutes he's in Zack Snyder's Justice League, and then realize that an entire black man's plotline, a scientist, if you will, an important scientist that is a massive part of the story, was ripped out. Absolutely ripped out by dumbass studio heads that ran Warner Brothers back in the day. And you want me to believe that Zack Snyder is some type of horrific, red hat wearer in that regard, based on everything that we've seen in Zack Snyder's Justice League and everything that he's said, the fact that he and Chris Terrio consulted Ray Fisher and said, hey, are we doing this right as far as telling Cyborg story, as far as the height of this and whatnot? We don't want to get anything wrong with respect to representing a black superhero incorrectly, right? This is all real shit for people that don't know. Right? If there's anybody listening to the show that doesn't know about this is all real shit that happened during the Justice League process that Warner Brothers destroyed, that Warner Brothers hid for, how many years was it? 3-4 years before they finally deigned to show it to us in 2021, and now we can own it in physical form and watch it on HBO Max at our leisure, right? But the Anti-Snyder cult would have you not know about that, would have you not think about that, would have you just look at Zack Snyder as the man who perverted and destroyed Superman in one fell swoop with his set of movies that were just dark murderverse, and I can't show it to my kids, and it's awful, and it's not what the character actually represents, right? And all that shit is coming back to the surface now with respect to, as we get closer to the Superman release date. And the fact of the matter is, until we understand that there are two cults at play here, this situation is never going to get any better. And that is where the third group comes into play. And that's the group that I reside in. And that's the group that just about everybody that listens to this show resides in. And that is rational individuals who are still actually Zack Snyder fans. Okay, so you have the Snyder cult, you have the anti-Snyder cult. Neither of them are fans of Zack Snyder. And then you have the actual real fans of Zack Snyder. And I am not one to use the term, well, a real fan of this or a real fan of that. But in this case, I'm being literal and I'm being objective in my description because it's not up for interpretation. Snyder cultists are not Zack Snyder fans. They claim to be. They claim to act like they, are a fan of the man's work. They're only a fan of his DC work. That's not being a fan of his work. That's only being a fan of his DC interpretations, and that's being selfish enough to only want his DC interpretations. I went and saw Army of the Dead in theaters and rewatched it on Netflix. I've seen Rebel Moon, right? Like, I've seen at least the regular versions. I haven't gone back and dedicated the 6 hours necessary to see the others, but I will. Most certainly, I'm paying attention to the next thing that the man does, right? Even this UFC project that he's doing with Dana White, which I got my thoughts on that. I don't think there's anything political with respect to him getting involved with Dana White and UFC. I don't think it's that at all. I think he just wants to do a UFC movie because he tends to be a little, naive with respect to that. He doesn't think about politics the same way that we do in that regard. He's just trying to make movies, right? Point is, as a Zack Snyder fan, I know about that project, and I'm curious about that project, and I support the idea of him doing projects outside of DC. And if at some point he gets an opportunity to come back and do a project in the DCU under James Gunn, great, awesome. I don't need it to happen. It's not a requirement, but I've largely moved on, right? And I say largely moved on from all the Snyderverse stuff because there's always going to be a part of me that feels that disappointment, right? What could have been, what the DCEU could have evolved into. It could have been much better. It could have been much stronger. It could have gone much quicker so that the haters and the anti-Snyder cult, they never would have had the power to basically incept the Snyder cult and create them out of the toxicity that came from reactions to Man of Steel and BVS for sure, right? Like, all of that never, and if Warner Brothers, obviously hadn't pulled off the whole Justice League disaster, right? A whole lot of horrible shit that's gone down in the last 7 years could have been completely avoided, not only in a production sense, but also in a fan sense. Whole lot of that could have been avoided if certain things just hadn't happened. But alas, they did, and this is the situation we find ourselves in now. So I find myself as a Zack Snyder fan having to stand up for all of the actual Zack Snyder fans that, quite honestly, are going to be in a movie theater a month and a half from now, right? A little under 2 months from now, I guess, to go see Superman with an open mind, right? And I mean, even some of the most fervent of us, some of us that might still be the most bitter about how the Snyderverse ended and about how Zack Snyder was treated, are still going to go into that movie theater with an open mind with respect to James Gunn's Superman. And maybe some of us already know that we're not going to like it better than Man of Steel. But we're willing to see what James Gunn is going to do because, one, unlike the Snyder cult, we don't blame James Gunn irrationally for how the DCEU ended, because why would we do that? That's incredibly illogical. Makes no damn sense whatsoever. But these are the same morons that bought into the whole idea that $7 and The Rock were going to save the Snyderverse. No, they weren't. For the umpteenth time, they were going to make 5 Black Adam versus Superman movies. That's what they were going to do. It was going to be the $7 Snyderverse. They were not going to follow the original plan. Whatever. But the cultists, you can't tell them shit. They're so blinded by, whatever hatred. And it's on both sides. Again, neither cult likes Zack Snyder. Neither of them. Even though one claims that they do, neither of them do. But this idea that these anti-Snyder people are going to lump us Snyder fans in with the cultists, yeah, no, I will not stand for that. I will not tolerate that whatsoever. And if I see that bullshit on my feed, I will call it out. And I will block those individuals. And I'd already gotten into a debate. Dude last night said all Snyder fans are cultists and they're not Superman fans. Oh, you can absolutely pound sand and take a long walk off Short Cliff, you bot, in that regard. Because there's no way that you're going to look at me and tell me that I'm a cultist. The cultists hate me. The cultists do not like me. They don't like what I represent because I call out their bullshit. And so many of us have called out their bullshit and continue to call out their bullshit. So the idea that you're going to lump me and anybody listening to this show that's still a fan of Snyder's films, but still has an open mind to go see James Gunn's films, the fact that you're going to lump us in with those cultists, get the hell out. Absolutely get the hell out. Shut your mouths. Whatever RageBot software you're controlling, pour water on that, short that shit out. No. Bullshit. Absolute bullshit. There are anti-Snyder cultists, there are Snyder cultists, and there are Snyder fans. I am a Snyder fan, which means that I got his trilogy sitting on my shelf. I got Man of Steel, I got BVS Ultimate Edition, and I got Zack Snyder's Justice League, and I'm chilling with that, and I enjoy the fact that I have physical copies of those films. I have digital copies as well, but I enjoy the fact that I have physical copies that no one can take away from me. They are part of my library forever. I love that, right? By the same token, I've also got the Christopher Reeve collection. I have all 4 of those films. I don't have Superman Returns, but I will, because I grew up with those movies, and I grew up with that conception of Superman. So don't tell me that I'm not a damn Superman fan. I most certainly am. Is he my favorite superhero? No. You know who my favorite superhero is. He hails from Gotham City. But whatever. The fact is I am a Superman fan, and I own all of his cinematic work except for Superman Returns, and I'm going to see Superman on July 11th, and I know I'm going to like it. I do. I know I'm going to like it. This is a Zack Snyder fan talking. I know I'm going to like James Gunn's Superman. I've seen enough so far out of these clips and out of that trailer that there's going to be, at the very least, pockets of it that's like, wow, that's really good. Wow, that's really good, right? I know that. How I'm going to treat the whole, like how much I'm going to like the entirety of the film, remains to be seen. But as somebody that already likes the majority of James Gunn's work, I don't like all of it. I mentioned earlier, don't like Guardians Volume 2 that much. But Guardians Volume 1 and Guardians Volume 3, phenomenal. The Suicide Squad, effing phenomenal. And I don't care if I'm on an island of 3 with that. I do not care. I will sit there and proudly wave that as the magnum opus for James Gunn as far as comic book films, until maybe July 11th. We'll see. We'll see how that goes. But my point is that I'm open-minded. And at the end of the day, I'm a DC fan and I'm a Superman fan, and I realize that there are multiple interpretations of these characters, and I can respect all of them. Just because I have a preference doesn't mean that I can't respect the others, right? And it's bullshit that anybody out there would say, well, you can have a preference for Christopher Reeve, but you can't have a preference for Henry Cavill. If you like Henry Cavill better than Christopher Reeve, that's more than a preference. Now you're just a cultist. I've had people tell me this. I've literally blocked at least 3 dipshits in the last 24 to 48 hours that literally told me this. That literally said the only way you could have a preference of Henry Cavill over Christopher Reeve is if you're a cultist and if you don't understand the character. Those people, whether they're bots or not, need to go. Those people are not part of this conversation. Those people don't belong in or deserve the Superman fandom, right? Not by any stretch of the imagination. That's gatekeeping of the highest, most arrogant and pretentious asshole order. Unbelievable. You can have a preference for Christopher Reeve, but you can't have a preference for Henry Cavill. Bullshit. The general audience has made their choice as far as what their preference is. And guess what? They're going to get a third option. And that's the beauty of what's going to happen on July 11th, because I firmly believe that David Cornswet and James Gunn are going to finally give us a third option for favorite Superman. And Gen Alpha, and maybe even the younger parts of Gen Z that didn't necessarily grow up with either Christopher Reeve or Henry Cavill, are going to have an opportunity to grow up with David Cornswet as their first cinematic Superman. And we're going to get, and this is going to be fun, right? Because it's almost like the Star Wars situation in this regard, right? And I'm rooting for this. Let me be clear. I'm rooting for this because I want this binary conversation about Superman to die. I want it to go away. I want it to be gone. Seriously. I want a third option. It's funny because where I live, the country that I live, in many ways, we want a third option for political reasons. We most certainly do. And it's kind of the same thing here, but we're getting a third option here. This is generational. This is how this works. I've talked about this with Star Wars before, about how you got a generation or two that was raised on the original trilogy. You got another generation raised on the prequel trilogy, and now a new generation raised on the sequel trilogy. And when they grow up and you they will come for anybody that has smoke about the sequel trilogy. It's already starting to happen, and as they get older, it will happen in droves, and there will be a resurgence of respect for Rey and Poe and Finn, just like there was for Anakin and for Obi-Wan and Jar Jar, right? Ahmed Best, right? There will be, just like there was a resurgence for those characters, for those actors, there'll be a resurgence for the sequel trilogy actors as well, when the kids that grew up with that trilogy of Star Wars, really take center stage in that regard. And what I want is for that to happen with David Corenswet Superman. I want that to happen with James Gunn Superman. I want a new generation to latch on to that movie, latch on to that interpretation of Superman, and then when the argument comes up about who's the best Superman, they come to the table. I want that. I absolutely want that. I even want general audience people. How about general audience people that aren't big Superman fans in the first place? They didn't necessarily gravitate to Reeve. They didn't grow up with Reeve, and they also don't necessarily gravitate to Cavill in that regard, right? How about those people that go and see the David Corenswet movie again because they bought their dog some milk bones with crypto on it, or because they were watching an NBA playoff game when they saw the Jason Tatum ad and went, "Oh, new Superman movie, that looks cool, let me check that out." Those people who thought that Superman was a boring, broken character in that regard because he's too perfect and there's no vulnerability, there's no relatability to him. Well, there's a lot of stuff in that trailer that looks like James Gunn is going to make Superman a relatable character. He's going to get knocked down and beat down and have to get up and be helped up by other humans and other bystanders around him, right? We're going to see some vulnerabilities, some humanity with Superman. It really looks like that in this film. And if that endears itself to the audience in any way, and you pull in any fans that start to say, "Hey, you know what, Corenswet's the best," right? And you start to hear that, and then that'll really get the pearl clutchers on both of these cults shaking. And I want that. I want the ground shaking beneath their feet. I want no stone unturned. I want their lives jolted forever. I want David Corenswet to destroy both of these cults. I want James Gunn to destroy both of these cults. And that third option that we're getting with this Superman film to kick off the DCU is our best opportunity for that. And I am rooting for it hardcore. That's how you know I am not a cultist. That's how you know I'm not a pearl clutcher when it comes to other versions of Superman, because first and foremost, whether it is Christopher Reeve, whether it is Henry Cavill, or whether it is David Corenswet, I am a fan of Superman. I am a fan of the character. He has been around for nearly 90 years, multiple interpretations. It is criminal that he only has what is about to be 3 cinematic interpretations. Can you imagine? For 47 years, we've had 2 cinematic versions of Superman. How is that fair? How is that fair to Superman? And one more time, Routh and Reeve count. We're not doing the semantics again here. Just saying they were one interpretation. Routh and Reeve, same interpretation. So, third interpretation of Superman in 47 years, due out in less than 2 months. Ridiculous. Superman should have the right to have as many interpretations in a shorter amount of time as Batman has had, which is 6 on the big screen since 1989, or even Spider-Man 3 since 2002, right? An even shorter amount of time. Superman deserves a similar level of respect, a similar level of exposure, if you will, as far as different versions for different generations. I mean, even with Spider-Man, right? Look at Spider-Man No Way Home and look at the different generations that gravitated toward that. Like, there were people that grew up with Tobey, there were people that grew up with Andrew Garfield, and there were people that are latched on to Tom Holland, right? There's a favorite among those groups. And do they fight about it? Is it like this pearl clutching? Is like, well, Tom Holland's Spider-Man should only have the Danny Elfman theme. No one is saying that. Well, I'm sure somebody is, but my point is, it's not nearly as loud as the culty argument surrounding Superman, and I am ready for that shit to die. I am ready for that to go away, and that is my biggest hope with this Superman film, is that it starts to begin to destroy the culty bullshit by offering that third option that basically shakes both of the cults to their knees. And this is why I also say that there's a decent chance that if and when this film turns out to not be Superman the Movie Redux, that those anti-Snyder cultists who are currently praising the movie are going to turn on James Gunn. And you know what? Fine. Out yourself. Go ahead and show how selfish and bullshitter you are. Show how you are no different than the Snyder cultists that you come to loathe and hate, right? You're just the other side of the same shit-stained coin in that regard, right? Go ahead. Out yourselves. Expose yourselves as far as how toxic and ridiculous you've been from the beginning, and then people will see your true colors. While the rest of us, hopefully, immensely enjoy Superman, immensely enjoy David Corenswet and Rachel Brosnahan and everybody else involved, and Nicholas Hoult, all the rest of the cast and crew, while we enjoy, hopefully, the launch of the DCU and the beginning of a new era for DC on the big screen, while we all enjoy that, you little cults can go play around in your corner, your dunce corners, and you can sit there and wallow in your misery, in your bullshit, and you can clutch your pearls, while the rest of us and the general audience, hopefully, go enjoy the future of Superman and the future of the DCU, and introduce a third Superman into the conversation of who is the best Superman. I'm hoping for that. I'm rooting for that. I'm rooting for that because I'm tired of this culty bullshit. I am. I'm done with both of them. I really am. And I will not have anybody on social media lump me or any of you, those of us that have moved past the Snyderverse, those of us that still enjoy it, but realize that it's gone, it's dead, it's not coming back, and if it ever were to come back in Elseworlds form, probably animated or a comic, which we're fine with, we're okay with. The cult is not, but we're okay with that, right? Aren't we all? I don't. Is anybody going to disagree with me on that? I don't know. I hope not. We'll find out, I guess, with respect to feedback to this episode. But either way, right? Those of us that are rational Snyder fans, those of us that follow his projects, those of us that promote his projects, those of us that are interested in his work, those of us that are open-mindedly going to watch Superman on July 11th and judge it as Superman fans because we're DC and Superman fans first and foremost at the beginning, regardless of who creates it, whether Man of Steel is our preference or not. We are not cultists, and I will be damned if we get lumped in with those crazy assholes on either side, whether they're the anti-Snyder cult or the Snyder cult. Neither one of them. They're both excommunicated. They are both toxic. They both destroy this fandom, as many on threads and social media have already indicated. Anybody that wants to sit there and consistently use this movie to weaponize against any of the others, no, it's bullshit. There is no weaponization. The cover image of this particular episode is going to be a picture of Superman. Pay attention to that. It will be a picture of Superman. Look at the cover image. All you see is Superman. All valid, all accurate with respect to cinematic Elseworlds interpretations, all on the table as far as being a preference for any one of us. There are Superman fans that prefer Christopher Reeve. There are Superman fans that prefer Henry Cavill, and there will be Superman fans that prefer David Corenswet. The way that you will know that they are Superman fans is that they will accept all of the interpretations even though they have a favorite. That's a Superman fan. The Superman fan that gatekeeps, the one that decides one is better than the other and should only be the only interpretation, those are not Superman fans. No matter how much they profess to be. I don't care how many comics they've read. I don't care how many episodes of the animated series or any of the DCAU that they've watched, however any of the movies they've watched, how much they can recite what Christopher Reeve or Henry Cavill says. They are not Superman fans. Superman fans are open-minded. Superman fans accept that the character's been around for nearly 9 full decades and he has multiple interpretations, and you can have a favorite without trashing the others. Period. And I just want to reiterate all of that as we get closer to the release date for Superman on July 11th, because like I said, it is starting to ramp up and ratchet up on social media. We're starting to hear more of the bullshit, more of the weaponization. Look, just mute and block those fools, seriously. Like, if you're going to respond to them, just make sure that you block them right afterwards so that their shit doesn't continue to pop up on your algorithm, because otherwise you're going to see nothing but negative shit about, whether it's Henry Cavill, Superman, or whomever in that regard, right? And no, don't need to see any of that shit. Mute, block, move on. That is what I'm doing, truthfully. Like, I've lost count how many people I've blocked on threads, and I don't care. Because if there's going to be a block limit for threads, I'm going to find out what it is. Because I believe in protecting my own personal peace, and when it comes to Superman, I'm definitely protecting my own personal peace. I'm not dealing with this bullshit. I'm not. I absolutely am not. Any gatekeepers out there, any pro clutchers, I never need to hear from them again. Whatever their thoughts are, however many followers they have, whatever, other connect, I don't give a shit. Podcasters, YouTubers, novelists, comic book creators, whomever, you start talking shit, you start weaponizing, you start gatekeeping this shit, you're gone. 1,000% gone. With no hesitation whatsoever. Be open-minded. Enough with this culty bullshit. Be a Superman fan and appreciate and respect all interpretations of the character while still having a favorite. It can be done. It ain't that difficult. Period. because those of us that are actual Zack Snyder fans are doing it now. And we're going to continue to do it. Watch us as we go and see that movie on July 11th and enjoy it, unlike the dumbass cults. So, just wanted to make that abundantly clear. Again, if you listen to the show for however long, you already know that. But for those of you who don't necessarily know that, tell your friends what you just heard. Seriously, make it abundantly clear. And don't worry, I will post way more about it on social media. You don't best believe that's going to happen. Best believe I'm going to continue this push, because there's no way I am letting us get lumped in with those crazies on either side. Absolutely not. They're the bane of our existence. They do nothing to help our discourse. They will do nothing to help us enjoy or even remotely critique the film on July 11th whatsoever. They will not be fair. They will not be just. They will certainly not be any type of rational, and we don't need to hear from either one of them. I don't give a shit. Either cult. Neither one of them provides anything good at this point. Period. There are no attacks to be had with respect to Christopher Reeve, with respect to Henry Cavill, and certainly not with respect to David Corenswet and James Gunn. All interpretations of Superman will be valid. We will have a preference. On July 11th, I will find out, personally, if my preference remains with Henry Cavill or if it switches to David Corenswet. I'm open to the possibility. I am. Most certainly. And even if my preference remains Henry Cavill, I more than likely will still find more than enough to enjoy about David Corenswet's performance. I have that feeling. I have that gut feeling. This is the gut feeling that we all know that we have when we see a trailer, or when we see marketing, or when we see something that we're interested in seeing, and we go, I think I'm going to like that, right? This is why I don't go to movies that I don't like. Movies that this whole thing, every once in a while, someone will bring this up. Ray, how is it that you like every movie you see? Because I don't see movies that I'm not interested in. I don't see movies that I don't think I'm going to like. If I look at a premise for a film and go, I don't know about that, I don't go see it. It's not that difficult. It really isn't. This idea of going into a movie blind, like, I'm not getting a good vibe from this. Maybe I'm wrong. No, trust your gut. Trust your instinct. If you don't think you're going to like it, your mind is going to subjectively point you in a particular direction and try to validate that shit for you, right? People don't take accountability for that. I do. This is why I don't go see movies that I don't think I'm going to care for. You think I would go see Mission Impossible if I didn't think I was going to care for it? No, I own the other 7, so obviously I'm going to go see Final Reckoning. Sinners. Why did I go see Sinners? Because I looked at the trailer and went, ooh, that looks cool. Oh, from Ryan Coogler? Oh, and I like Michael B. Jordan and the entire rest of this cast. I knew I was going to like that movie. Did I think I was going to believe it was going to be the movie of the year, which it is so far, in my opinion? Broke over 300 million, I might add, as far as the, so Variety can suck it with their whole 185 million break-even point, whatever. It's made well over that. Did I think Sinners was going to be that type of a film? No, I'm glad it was, because I knew I was going to enjoy it going into it. But either way, follow your gut, follow your instinct, and my instincts tell me that on some level, I am going to seriously enjoy this particular Superman film. Whether it becomes my favorite or not, it doesn't matter, because I will still respect it, and I will still consider it valid, because it will be, and I will still respect anybody that elevates it to their favorite and enjoys it, because I want people to enjoy it, because I want Superman and DC Studios to succeed, because again, I am a Snyder fan and also first and foremost a Superman and DC fan, as I suspect many of the others listening to this show are. So there you have it. If you think I'm full of shit, that's your business, and clearly you haven't been listening to this show for very long if you think that everything I just said was a lie. The rest of you know better, and hopefully anybody new listening to this knows better going forward as well. And that is going to do it for this particular episode of the Flightcast. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for supporting the Flightcast. I know you've got thoughts on this. I know we can talk about this. We've got a little under 2 months away from the release of Superman, and I know that you've had your encounters on social media with a number of the same people that I'm talking about, the trolls and whatnot, that are trying to lump us rational Snyder fans in with the damn cults. If you've got any thoughts on anything that I had to say with respect to that, or even with what you think about the marketing from DC Studios and whatnot, right? Anything that you want to talk about with respect to movies, TV, and other assorted media, you know where to find me on Threads and Instagram at The Flightcast, on Blue Sky at Flightcast. You can comment under the posting for this episode on the Flightcast YouTube page. There's also the Flightcast Facebook page, and also I can be reached by email, of course, at ray@theflightcast.com. All right, take care, stay safe out there, have a great rest of the week, and I will see you all next time. Take it easy.